Hello, my lovelies, and welcome back to the Ages of Chaos. Slightly interesting one this time around. We're going to do the World Eaters. Yeah, we're going to see how the World Eaters are currently represented in 9th Ed. Now, the World Eaters Codex is imminent. We're getting lots of little tidbits and leaks and things about the World Eaters Codex at the moment, and it looks really interesting. As I've mentioned many times before, both of the cult codices thus far, the Thousand Sons and the Death Guard, have been really good. The reinvention of the Thousand Sons in particular has been my personal favourite. I think they are spectacular in 9th Ed. I really like the way they're represented. I like the way they play. I like the way you can build army lists from them and the way they function. Bearing in mind I'm not a competitive player at all, I've had a lot of fun with my Thousand Sons. I can tell you. Scarab Occult Terminators, am I right? Scarab Occult Terminators in the Cult of Time or the Cult of Duplicity. My god. Best Terminators in the game? Probably. Maybe. Arguably. Certainly the Terminators that can do the most, but that's enough of talking about the Thousand Sons, because we'll be here all day. Currently, the World Eaters have a sort of get-you-by army list and an Index Hereticus rather than an Index Astartes that was in White Dwarf issue 477. And it works. It's a bit like the Emperor's Children little suffix in Codex Chaos Space Marines. That's how it works. So you use Codex Chaos Space Marines as a base, so all the rules that apply to a baseline Codex Chaos Space Marines army apply to the World Eaters, but they just have certain restrictions and certain benefits and so on and so forth. It is only a get-you-by army list. It is not a full army list by any stretch of the imagination, but this is what they are now. In terms of background, the World Eaters are fascinating. They really are, because the World Eaters they're the oldest Chaos Space Marine Legion in background terms, not in the sense that they're in universe the oldest, but in the sense that theirs was the very first Legion that had its background detailed at all. Way back in Realms of Chaos Slaves to Darkness, theirs was the very, very first Legion to have its background. And it hasn't changed very much. Unlike, say, the Emperor's Children, which has changed dramatically since those days. Like, dynamically it's changed. So much has shifted around for the Emperor's Children, as we explored in the last episode. The Thousand Sons, their background has changed quite dramatically. The Sons of Horus, the Black Legion as they are now. All the other legions, of course, because most of them didn't really have anything, any background to speak of back then. But the World Eaters, all that's really happened with the World Eaters background, the baseline, like the template that you find in Slaves to Darkness, is basically the same template you get today. All that's really happened is things have been elaborated upon. So they are, I mean, you guys know who the World Eaters are. They are the butchers and berserkers of the Great Crusade originally. They are the Legion who was sent in when there was no other option, and what the Imperium wanted is utter desolation, just to destroy everything without any recourse or respite, without any hesitation. The World Eaters were problematic from the get-go. They weren't called the World Eaters originally. This is a nice new addition to the background, by the way. They were called the Warhounds originally, and this was before their Primarch Angron was found. They were called the Warhounds, and they weren't quite as well mad as they later became at that point. They hadn't adopted the psychosurgery rituals that Angron would bring with him from the world of Nuceria. This is another lovely new addition as well. They never used to have a home world. Most of the legions didn't back then. I don't think there was mention of Prospero in the Thousands, because that's always been like a key part of their background. But the Death Guard didn't have a home world. Barbarous wasn't mentioned back then. Chemos wasn't mentioned back then, the Emperor's Children home world. And Nuceria wasn't mentioned as their homeworld until very, very recently. It was actually Aaron Dembski Bowden in the Horus Heresy series who named Nuceria as the homeworld of the World Eaters and detailed its culture, basically as a sort of old feudal system, which was it's an oligarchy. It's ruled by an elite of aristocratic nobles who keep the populace under control through tyranny and armed might, and it's bread and circuses, essentially. The lower classes are fed through a meat grinder gladiatorial arena, and that's where Angron came to rest. That's Angron's homeworld. And until the Emperor came, he, unlike most of the Primarchs, in fact, I think every other Primarch in existence managed to conquer their homeworld, managed to become the de facto leader of their homeworld. Even Nighthaunter did it. Angron didn't. Angron is the only one who didn't manage that. He was a slave. He was found where he fell, and he was basically butchered. His mind was ripped open, and he had the device that would later become known as the Butcher's Nails implanted in him. Now, the Butcher's Nails are another new addition, bizarrely, something that's so key to the background of the World Eaters, but the Butcher's Nails, they weren't detailed until, again, the Horus Heresy. What you got in the original background of the World Eaters was a vague mention of how there was ritual psychosurgery conducted on new recruits to the World Eaters to make them more frenzied and more berserk in battle. That was it. It was much more vague back then. It wasn't as specific or as detailed as it is now. There certainly wasn't a specific device. But in the Horus Heresy, we learned of the Butcher's Nails, the first example of which was implanted in Angron. And the Butcher's Nails are effectively a device that rewires the circuitry and chemistry of the brain so that when those afflicted with them are at rest, they are driven by constant pain. And the pain escalates and escalates and escalates until they start to engage in violence. And when they engage in violence, it activates the pleasure centers of their brain, and they experience a wash of ecstasy. And as a result, they come to associate ecstasy with violence. And after a while, it's like any drug addiction. After a while, just to bring themselves up to a particular level of operation, they have to engage in extreme acts of violence. Now, Nuceria is for me, one of the greatest mysteries of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Angron didn't conquer it. When the Emperor and the Great Crusade found Nuceria, Angron was about to die. He'd led a revolt with his fellow gladiators, whom he regarded as his brothers and his sisters, and he loved them dearly, he really did. But they were about to die. They'd been herded into a mountainous region of Nuceria, and the vast techno-armies of the ruling aristocracy were about to close on them and murder them. Now, It was a brave last stand. It was everything Angron had ever wanted, actually. Angron is that kind of character. He was ready to sell his life. The Emperor actually came to him the night before the battle and said, "Come with me. I can lead you away." And Angron said, "No. I will die here with my brothers and my sisters." Now, the Emperor could have fucking helped, couldn't he? The Emperor was in orbit with an army of custodies and warhounds. He could have helped. He could have descended to the world en masse and murdered these aristocratic bastards that had enslaved half of Nuceria. He could have helped Angron win, but he didn't. Instead, he did the worst thing imaginable. He teleported Angron away at the eve of the battle and left his brothers and his sisters to die. And that is such a strange decision. They didn't even hang around to conquer Nuceria. They just kind of left it as it was. It is the strangest decision imaginable. For a creature that has been alive, that has experienced humanity since the dawn of human civilization, who knows the psychology of humanity inside and out, who has experienced everything of humanity there is to know. What a strange decision. For me, it's the greatest evidence that the Horus heresy was intended, that there is a wider plan at work with regards to the Emperor, because he must have known what that would do to Angron. When Angron was teleported to the belly of the Conqueror, the Warhound's ship, it wasn't called the Conqueror back then, it was called something else, but Angron later renames it the Conqueror. He basically went insane and he started butchering his own sons. Any equerry, any Warhound space marine that was sent to parley with him, he ripped apart. The only one he would listen to was Khan the Betrayer, who would later become known as the Betrayer. Khan was the great mediator, the great politician of the Warhounds back then, and he somehow managed to calm Angron down and managed to gain his ear. And Angron very reluctantly took on the mantle of the Primarch of what he then renamed the World Eaters. And one of his first edicts was that the World Eaters would be implanted with a semblance of the same devices that were making a mockery of his mind, basically, the butcher's nails. And Khan was one of the very first to be implanted. And it was a horrible process, by all accounts. I mean, according to the Index Astartes article, which goes into more detail about it than any background before, so many of the earliest experiments were lost. Their minds were destroyed, or they became just frothing, insane and uncontrollable, and murdered their surgeons and or everyone around them. It wasn't until much later on, after much failed experimentation, that a stable form of the butcher's nails was created, and Khan was one of the very first implanted with it. And the results of that decision were absolutely catastrophic. I mean, what was a reasonably stable legion up until that point became a byword for butchery and slaughter. The World Eaters just arriving in a system was often enough to make that system surrender if there was some dispute or uprising or whatever, because the fear of what they would do. I mean, Angron and the World Eaters there was no parley with them. There was no stopping them. If they were unleashed and the butcher's nails started to kick in, that was it. That was it. They wouldn't stop until the worlds they fell on were a charnel house, until there was nothing left. You can kind of see how they came under the sway of Khorne, can't you? Obviously, when the heresy erupted, when Horus declared his independence from the Imperium, Angron was all too ready to throw. He was one of the in fact, I think he was, alongside Fulgrim, the very first Primarch to throw in with him. He's always respected Horus more than the Emperor. There's always been that seed of resentment from their initial meeting, from what happened on Nuceria. And after that, after they were released from the yoke of imperial bureaucracy, that was it. That was it. The World Eaters, just their insanity deepened and deepened and deepened and deepened. They fell further and further under the influence of Khorne, largely as a result of the manipulations of the Word Bearers. There's a great piece of new background detailed in the book Betrayer that Aaron Dembski-Bowden wrote, where Lorgar and the Word Bearers and Angron and the World Eaters embark on their own little crusade through the Calth system in Macragge, and it's there that they find Nuceria, and Angron is allowed to come to terms with what happened there, and also with those who destroyed him, who butchered him, who made him so much less than he could ever be. And Lorgar's doing this deliberately. He's doing this deliberately because he knows that the poetry of that, the mythic poetry of that, pleases Chaos, it pleases Khorne, you know? So they embark on this incredible crusade of butchery across the face of Nuceria, and it's there that Angron is transformed into the Angel of Blood, the Demon Prince, the Demon Primarch of Khorne. At that point, he doesn't even know who Khorne is. He doesn't worship Khorne. He's in battle against Robert Guilliman and the Ultramarines who have come to defend Nuceria from him. And Lorgar basically envelops Angron in a warp storm. He is the one who's manipulating it, who's making it happen, and he is the one who orchestrates Angron's ascension, if you like. And it's a really fascinating thing. Later on, Khan comes to Lorgar and basically says, "What did you do to him?" And Lorgar says, "I saved him. The butcher's nails would have killed him eventually. They were killing him." But the demon Primarch Angron still has like a demonic version of the butcher's nails in his brain. So they're still there. He is still the same. In fact, he's not just the same monster. He is all of his worst traits emphasized to the nth degree. Unlike the other demon Primarchs, all of whom have sentience, all of whom have still have their old agendas ticking away, Angron doesn't. Angron is just a force of nature. He's a monster. He even forgets how to talk. Because the demon Primarch of Khorne isn't required to know how to talk. He forgets, and he has to work at it. He becomes a seething altar of cornate energy, and his influence starts to spread throughout the World Eaters' ships, throughout the Conqueror, and eventually that's it. By the time they arrive on Terra, and they have to be dragged there, by the way, by Perturabo and the Iron Warriors. By the time they arrive on Terra, they're monsters. There's nothing left of them. They are just cornate madmen, frothing lunatics who only want slaughter. And in the ages since, that's only gotten worse. That's just gotten worse. They are not an organised legion. They've been shattered by so many calamities and internal conflicts. The biggest one, of course, was Scalathrax. After the failure of the heresy, they retreated into the Eye of Terror alongside the other traitor legions, and they fought the Emperor's children on a world called Scalathrax. And whereas even the other World Eaters actually did try to seek some shelter from the freezing nights of Scalathrax, because they would have died even inside their power armor, Khan, who by that point had become so suffused with cornate energy, wasn't very happy about that. He condemned that as cowardice in the face of what Khorne would actually want, and he turned on his fellows. He took up a flamer and burnt them from their refuges, set torch to all of the buildings where they were seeking refuge, and that conflict spread out throughout the entire legion until they became just fractured warbands. Now that's exactly what they are. They don't have any homeworld, not unlike, say, the Death Guard, who have the Plague Planet, or the Thousand Sons, who have Sorciarius, or the Emperor's Children, who, according to rumour, have a pleasure planet somewhere deep, deep within the Eye of Terror. The World Eaters don't. Again, just in that sort of twisted echo of Angron's own origins, he's one of the only traitor Primarchs who isn't fit to have his own world, because how could he rule a world? He's mad. He's a force of nature in his demonic form. He is just slaughter and genocide incarnate. So how could he possibly rule a world? There's just no way, right? So that's what they are. They are fractured, splintered warbands, and they still practice the old psychosurgeries on new recruits. And in fact, the butcher surgeons that inflict that surgery have spread out through the other traitor legions. So a lot of them now are under Abaddon's employ. So there are honest to God Black Legion cornate berserkers now, and that's where they are in background terms. They are spread across the universe. I mean, the most notable thing they've done in the more recent millennia is the War for Armageddon, the original War for Armageddon, where more or less the entire Legion and Angron and demon hordes and cornate warbands and renegade chapters fell on Armageddon and almost destroyed it. They almost took the planet. And were it not for the need to suffuse the world with cornate energy to sustain their demonic forms, they would have taken it. They would have absolutely taken it. Since then, Angron and the World Eaters have basically been at large in the universe, not cohered as a threat, but still pretty terrifying, even in their fractured forms. Now, in terms of the way they play, the World Eaters have been problematic for a long time. They are one of the most assault-based armies in the game, because that's what they're for. They actually revel in all forms of warfare, and Khorne also revels in all forms of warfare. So they do have long-range capacities. They have long-range firepower capacities, but they favour close combat. That's really where they excel. But really, from 3rd ed onwards, most editions of Warhammer 40,000 have just naturally favoured firepower. Long-range firepower. As a result, they've suffered quite a lot. They've always been a really difficult army to play. They were okay in 3.5, like most Chaos armies were. They had a really good list in 3.5. But since then, there hasn't been much. Let's put it that way. They've been one of those armies that's always been heavily compromised. Now, utilising the new Codex Chaos Space Marines as a base, that's not the case anymore. They have access to pretty much everything in the book, so they can be more easily balanced than they could before. There's a lot going for them here. The only real proviso in the Index Hereticus is that everything has to take the Mark of Khorne. Well, most things can take the Mark of Khorne, so that's fine. And anything that can't take the Mark of Khorne as a result of its rules, that's fine. It gets the Khornate keyword. It's absolutely fine. So you can structure World Eaters armies now by selecting certain units to make quite a balanced and fun force. There's a lot more options for deployment, for example, now, where if you are going for an assault-heavy army, you can take very fast units, or you can take units that can teleport, or you can take units that have jump packs and whatnot to get around the fact that they're going to get shot up as they cross the battlefield. Now, in terms of their Legion trait, it's a very short and simple one. Unlike the Legion traits in Codex Chaos Space Marines, it's just one tier. There's not 2 tiers, there's just one. And it's the Butcher's Nails. Angron's sons hurl themselves towards their foe, intent on tearing them apart in a brutal whirlwind of violence. Each time a unit with this trait fights, if it made a charge move, was charged, or performed a heroic intervention this turn, then until that fight is resolved, add 1 to the attacks characteristic of models in this unit. So, if they're in assault, if they're in the fight phase, then they get +1 attack. Now, that might not seem much until you take into consideration a few things. First of all, this acts in conjunction with Let the Galaxy Burn, right? And Let the Galaxy Burn means that they're going to be gaining attacks and extra hits anyway when they're rolling their exploding 6s in certain phases of the fight, yeah? On top of that, most of the units in Codex Chaos Space Marines and the Get You By listing for Khorne Berserkers in this article already have multiple attacks. When you apply that to, for example, Warp Talons that have 5 attacks apiece, or Possessed that have 5 attacks apiece, that's a lot of attacks. That is an enormous amount of attacks those units are going to be throwing out. It's pretty damn good, actually. And it means that they're just always going to get a better chance to roll those exploding 6s. It's short, it's sweet, it's simple, it's get you by, but it works. It really is a very effective little Legion trait, that one. Now, again, since we've already mentioned it, there is a the Khorne Berserkers are not in Codex Chaos Space Marines anymore, like most of the cult units. The only cult unit in Codex Chaos Space Marines is the Noise Marines, because they're not getting their Codex anytime soon. The Khorne Berserkers are here in White Dwarf, and basically what characterises them is the fact that they have Strength 5 from the get-go, and they have 5 attacks apiece. That's their baseline attacks, with by the by, let the galaxy burn. So in the wanton slaughter phase, they're going to be rolling exploding 6s. And with their Legion trait, which is the Butcher's Nail, so they're really getting 6 attacks apiece. That's pretty damn good. They're also all equipped with Berserker Chain Blades, and Berserker Chain Blades are basically chain swords and chain axes that have -2 armor piercing. In combination with their ability to take the unit icon, that also improves their armor penetration even more. So technically they've got armor penetration -3 in close combat. With the amount of attacks that they're throwing out, with the Mark of Khorne that adds 1 to their strength characteristic if they charged or performed a heroic intervention, they're actually strength 6. So with the amount of attacks they're throwing out, with their strength 6 attacks, with their -3 armor piercing, these guys are going to be eating through almost any assault unit you chuck them at. They're pretty damn nasty. They're one of the better assault units in the game, and also they're troops in a World Eater's army. They are troops, so yeah, they're good. Sadly, they have lost their fight again ability from the last Codex, but that's something, it seems, that they are trying to remove anyway. There are very few units that can do that fight a second time thing in 9th Ed, and those that can, they're very rare, and normally you have to pay a premium for it, so I'm not gonna... There are units that can do it, though, and we'll get to that in a moment. In terms of the Warlord traits are largely focused on making the recipient a more vicious combatant, basically. Then there are very few sort of like aura based abilities here, because the World Eaters are not really that inspired by their leaders. They only revere violence, so the most violent of them, the strongest, are the ones that lead. So you've got Slaughterborn. This warlord bears the favour of Khorne, his murderous prowess growing with each worthy skull claimed in his master's name. Each time an enemy character, monster, or Titanic model is destroyed by an attack made by this warlord, until the end of the battle, add 1 to this warlord's attacks and strength characteristics. That's pretty good. You're going to have to get them across the battlefield, you're going to have to kill characters, monsters, or Titanic models, but applied to, say, something like a Demon Prince, really good. Really, really good. They're just going to keep getting better as the battle goes on. Number 2, Arch Slaughterer. When surrounded by foes to kill, this warlord is truly in his element and gives in to the Butcher's Nails. Which of them don't do that, quite frankly? At the start of the fight phase, if there are more enemy models than friendly models within 3 inches of this warlord, until the end of the phase, add die 3 to this warlord's attacks characteristic. So you want them in the thick of the fighting, basically. If there are more enemies than friends around them, they get even more attacks. So that's pretty cool. 3, Disciple of Khorne. Many claim to hide the title of one of Khorne's 8 foremost champions, but any pretenders are swiftly proven false, for none can rival one of their number in the art of single combat. Each time a melee attack is made by this warlord against a character unit or a unit that contains any models with a wounds characteristic of 5 or more, you can re-roll the hit roll and you can re-roll the wound roll. So it's basically, they seek out the best fights on the battlefield. You're going to want your Khorne Lord or your Demon Prince or whoever has that to be seeking out the big monsters and enemy champions and whatnot, and it gives them an edge. It's pretty good. Violent Urgency. Now, this one isn't aura. This warlord's bloodlust is palpable and pushes the Butcher's Nails of those around him into overdrive. This in turn fuels a desperate need to spill blood. While a friendly World Eater's unit is within 6 inches of this warlord, add 1 to advance and charge rolls made for that unit. That's really useful, actually. You're probably going to want to take that one, because it fixes some of the problems that we were talking about earlier, where, you know, assault-based armies have a tendency to get shot off the battlefield before they reach the enemy lines. That gives them a leg up in that regard. Number 5, True Berserker. When this warlord meets his foes face to face, his fury is such that he will brush aside even fatal wounds, the better to claim more skulls for Lord Khorne. Each time an attack is allocated to this warlord, halve the damage characteristic of that attack, rounding up. Very, very good. Again, keeps the warlord alive. Good on things like Demon Princes, Disco Lords, that is Lord's Discordance, multiple big multi-wound monsters, stuff like that. 6, Battle Lust. This warlord's lust for battle draws him into any and all fights, his thirst driving him to new heights of battlefield frenzy. This warlord is eligible to perform a heroic intervention if it is within 6 inches horizontally and 5 inches vertically of an enemy unit, instead of 3 inches horizontally and 5 inches vertically. Each time this warlord makes a heroic intervention move, it can move up to 6 inches instead of 3. At the start of the fight phase, if this warlord is within engagement range of enemy units, it can fight first. So that's pretty good. That's like multi-tiered and is pretty damn good. It gets around certain problems with engagement, especially if the terrain is a bit problematic. That's a nice one. Stratagems. Their stratagems are cheap and cheerful. They've got about as much as all the other legions, so they've done quite well. Scorn of sorcery, like the god they worship, the warriors of the World Eaters despise psychers and their trickery, and the sheer force of their hatred can sever sorcerers' powers. Use this stratagem in your opponent's psychic phase, after a psychic test is passed for an enemy psyker unit, and after any deny the witch attempt is made, if any. If that enemy psyker unit is within 24 inches of any World Eaters units from your army, roll 1d6 on a 4+, that psychic power is denied. So it's a way, because there are never going to be psychers in a Khorne force, ever, nor should there be, quite frankly. And this is a way of giving them a little bit of psychic defense. It's pretty good. Apoplectic Frenzy, I like this one. Howling in rage, World Eaters surge towards the foe. Use this stratagem at the start of the first battle round. Select one World Eaters infantry unit from your army. That unit can make a normal move of up to 9 inches. This unit must end that move more than 9 inches away from any enemy models. If both players have units that can do this, the player who's taking the first turn moves their units first. So again, it's a way of getting round the deployment problem and the movement problem, and it's very good on units that have like a high movement stat, so things like bikers, raptors, warp talons, etc., etc. Skulls for the Skull Throne, World Eater's Epic Deed stratagem. Offer up the skulls of mighty champions to Khorne. Use this stratagem when an enemy character model is destroyed by a melee attack made by a World Eater's character model from your army. Gain die 3 command points. The limit of gaining or refunding 1 command point per battle round does not apply to any command points gained via this stratagem. That's pretty good. So by killing, and it impels you to seek out enemy characters to kill, especially now because command points are at a premium now. That's very good, actually. It's a narrative stratagem, and it's really fun. I like that one. This one, the Red Butchers. Okay, a requisition stratagem. Entombed within their Terminator armor, these crazed warriors are unleashed like rabid beasts. Use this stratagem before the battle. Select one World Eater's Chaos Terminator squad unit from your army. Add 1 to the strength characteristic of models in that unit. That unit gains the following ability, Blood for the Blood God. This unit can be selected to fight 1 additional time in each fight phase. Amazing. So it's an upgrade for your Terminators and makes them into genuine Khornate Terminators. Terminators in the Chaos Space Marines book are already really good. They're one of the best units in it. Almost every Chaos Space Marine army takes Terminators because they're just so good. This makes them into monsters. Being able to fight twice in the same turn with all the attacks and specialist weapons that Terminators have, plus with that +1 strength and the Butcher's Nails and everything else going for them, that is fantastic. Everybody's going to take that. Everybody's going to take that to make some Red Butchers. That's fabulous. Kill, Maim, Burn! Yay! The Khan-centric one. Use this stratagem in the fight phase before a World Eaters unit from your army consolidates. Where are we? Until the end of the phase, each time a model in that unit makes a consolidation move, it can move an additional 3 inches. Really good. So it just means that you get closer to the enemy the more you kill. It's really good. Wild Fury. Sheer aggression can cut through even the thickest armor. Use this stratagem in the fight phase when a World Eaters unit from your army is selected to fight. Until the end of the phase, each time a model in that unit makes an attack, improve the armor penetration characteristic of that attack by 1. Given that you've already got a lot of really heavy armor piercing in this army, that's only going to have application against like really densely armoured enemies, but I can see where it would be useful. Stoke the Nails. Aggression stimulators implanted into the brains of the World Eaters drive them into uncontrollable rages. Use this stratagem at the start of the fight phase. Select one World Eater's core unit from your army. Until the end of the phase, the unit is considered to be engaged in wanton slaughter. Excellent, that's really good. Add 1 to the strength characteristic of models in that unit. Yeah, it's excellent. You use it when you're in combat, and it just means that your units go insane. It just means that they're going to have more attacks, they're going to have higher strength, and there's not going to be that much that can stand up against them. It's very, very good. Blood for the Blood God. When blood reigns, the warriors of the World Eaters are fearless. Use this stratagem in the fight phase. When an enemy unit is destroyed by a melee attack by a World Eaters model from your army, until the end of the turn, each time a morale test is taken for a World Eaters unit from your army, it is automatically passed. It's not going to have that much application, really, because everything has very high leadership. It's not... It can have application under certain circumstances, if you've got a lot of units that are under half strength, for example. But beyond that, it's a very specific one. That is. But generally speaking, the stratagems are cheap and cheerful, they are simple, and they have incredible application. There isn't a duff one amongst them. It's really, really good. In terms of the relics, there's a couple of old favourites here, like the Banner of Rage. That's going to be good. Add one. That's an aura that you give to a priest, so your Dark Apostle. The Banner of Rage contains the bound souls of the most bloodthirsty of Khorne's servants. It radiates palpable waves of anger and an urge for slaughter that beat upon the minds of those nearby, driving them into a killing frenzy. Priest model only. You can unfurl the Banner of Rage in your own fight phase. Add one to the attacks characteristic of models in friendly World Eaters units while their unit is within 6 inches of this model. So again, on top of all the other attacks they have, there's the opportunity to get more as well. It's very, very good, that is. Gorefather. So Khan the Betrayer carries one of Angron's discarded axes, which is Gorechild. This is the other one. This is Gorefather. This immense chain axe is said to have once been wielded by Angron himself. Though it was ultimately cast aside, this relic is of such importance to the Legion that wars have been fought between rival warbands seeking to claim it for themselves. One strong enough to wield Gorefather can scythe his enemies into scattering explosions of blood and ruined flesh. Model with Power Axe or Exalted Power Axe only. This relic replaces a Power Axe. Blah, 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 blah. Abilities. Each time an attack is made with this weapon, subtract 1 from the attack's hit roll, and on an unmodified wound roll of 6, the target suffers 3 mortal wounds. That's balmy. Yeah, so you give this to a really nasty character like a Demon Prince or to a Disco Lord, and opponents start to just pop like pimples around them. It's really good. The Berserker Glaive. Wow, that's an old favourite. The bearer of this demon-infested killing tool is driven to a state of apoplectic frenzy, there it is again, by the proximity of its red-hot steel. His fellow World Eaters treat him with great caution, shunning him as a dangerous maniac even amongst his own bloodthirsty kind, while venerating him as a living totem of rage. A host of bloodletters are bound into the weapon's fabric, and by channeling the life essence of those it slays, the vampiric demon weapon ensures its isolated host can fight like a man possessed for weeks on end. Berserker Glaive, it's got a really good statistics, and it also gives the wielder a 5+ shrug. So you basically want that again on something like a Demon Prince or a Disco Lord. It makes them more survivable. It's really good. Really, really good. But yeah, that's basically it, to be honest. There's also an entry for Khan the Betrayer, and what can I say about him? He's an assassin. He just kills everything he touches. He's an absolute monster. He can fight twice in any combat phase. He's got 6 attacks base on top of the Butcher's Nails and everything else. He carries Gorechild, which basically means Gorechild means that he ignores any or all modifiers to his weapon skill or any or all modifiers to his hit roll because he's so skilled with it. So he's always going to hit, really. There's very little that can take him down. In terms of one-on-one combat, really, the only things that can take him down are things like Primarchs and Avatars and things like that. He's a beast. He's an absolute monster. But yeah, for a get-you-by army list, the World Eaters are sitting quite pretty, as are most of the legions that are represented by this core Chaos Space Marines book. As it goes, quite a bit of effort has been put into this. I can see how it would be lots and lots of fun to cobble together different army lists from this and from the core book. It's a lot of fun, and it feels to me like World Eaters, even though this is a get-you-by army list, this is about as good as they've been represented ever, to be quite honest. I mean, hopefully, when the new Codex hits, that will make this seem like a pale shadow. But until then, yeah, World Eaters players, you seem to be sitting pretty at the moment, and I'm very, very pleased for you. Cannot wait for the Codex, though. And yeah, just wait for another one of these when that comes out, because I don't play World Eaters. I'm a Thousand Sons, Emperor's Children kind of guy, but boy, am I going to get that Codex. Of course I am. And I'll almost certainly pick up Angron as well. So, until then, my loves, bye-bye!